Alright. What's good, y'all? Soul here, and welcome back to my story mode. So, like many of you guys, I have been here for years sitting, thinking, and pondering what kind of major changes could they make to mainline Pokemon games to make them different. Now, two things. One, obviously, there's a lot of things that Pokemon could do to change things up and be a little bit more unique. However, they still have yet to perfect what they have going at this point in time anyway, so yeah, before they make some major changes to the core games, we should probably worry about those aspects first. Secondly, this is more or less just a passing thought that I decided to make a video about because of something that I played recently. I absolutely love turn-based combat, and I love that Pokemon has always done that. I have no problem with turn-based combat. Please do not get that twisted. However, as things go with, most aspects of life, you can only do something the exact same way so many times before it becomes monotonous. Which is why every now and again, especially in the video game space, when you have a massive franchise like Pokemon, it's nice to be able to, take a little bit of a risk here and there to change things up and see what people enjoy. Hence why Legends, despite all of its flaws and issues, got such a massively positive response. It decided to do some things that the core Pokemon games have never really done, and it was such a fresh take on the series that they decided to do it again, but for the next major title in the franchise. And only about 3 years after the original attempt at this. Yeah, that's definitely something to pay attention to. So it's obviously not like they're opposed to changing up the system a little bit. However, how far are they willing to go? Well, as you've seen in the title and thumbnail, today we're asking a very specific question. Can real-time combat work in mainline Pokemon? As I said a moment ago, I absolutely love RPGs. Turn-based will always be one of my favorite styles. However, Pokemon has done it for so long now that other styles that have been introduced to me start to look a lot more appealing. One series that comes to mind when it comes to a unique RPG style is the Mario RPGs. Whether it be Super Mario RPG, the Paper Mario series, or the Mario & Luigi series, all three of these games have a very similar concept that have spanned across all of these games. I don't know if there's like an official name for it, but me and apparently a lot of others have been calling it the timed button press mechanic. Essentially, when you get into combat and you press your action, instead of just waiting for the animation to play out, you actively have to press the button and time it properly to do the most amount of damage that you can. In the case of Mario RPGs, this also applies to dodging and blocking attacks. Long and short of it is, the better your timing, the better the result of the battle in your favor. Again, I only bring this up because this is one of the first examples that comes to mind when it comes to changing up the formula of standard RPGs. This is not something I could ever see Pokemon going for. It just doesn't really work with their style, as much as I would love to see something of this caliber. However, real-time combat doesn't seem all that out there. I say this because we have already seen real-time combat in Pokemon games, mainly spin-offs. One example that comes to mind is the Pokepark games. One of those games' prime mechanics is literally battling other Pokemon in a quick 1v1. In Pokepark 1, you only play as Pikachu, so you're using your standard dash attacks, your little volt tackles, your thunderbolts, all of that good stuff. And then we moved to Pokepark 2, where they introduced the 5th gen starters. Now you have a much bigger cast, a wider array of moves to access. And just like pretty much any other Pokemon game where battling is involved, type matchups are the name of the game. If you have a type advantage against your opponent, you're doing more damage. Even in real-time combat, that doesn't change. With Pokepark as a blueprint, I could easily see 3D real-time battles working out in their favor. I feel like I should note that I look to Pokepark 1 and 2 for examples because those quick seamless battles are something we would probably want in like a 20 to 30 hour RPG, depending on how you play. If you're playing a mainline Pokemon game and you run into a wild Pokemon, the last thing you would want is for every single encounter to play out like Pokken Tournament. Now, let's not get anything twisted here. I absolutely adore Pokken Tournament. I love it to death. All of the mechanics are unique, the flashiness and the grittiness just make for an awesome blend for a fighting game. Unfortunately though, as much as I love that style and would love to see some ideas implemented into this idea, It's way too mechanically heavy to be practical for a mainline RPG. You know what I'm saying? Could you imagine going to Route 1 and having to battle like a Rattata or a Caterpie in this style? That would be absolutely ridiculous to do a million times over. So then, where exactly does that leave us? Well, it may be a while before somebody truly tries to put something like that together. However, we do currently have the best example of a 2D sprite-based version of our idea that is very much tangible and playable. A couple of weeks ago, a Pokemon fan game from about 2 years ago resurfaced. I believe it's developed by somebody that goes by F3R. I don't know if that's a team or a singular person. Go ahead and correct me on the information if I'm wrong. I'll probably put the info in the description and the comment section below anyways, this is a sprite-based Pokemon fan game that utilizes top-down, real-time battles. So imagine like the DS era of Pokemon, but instead of going into a turn-based battle, you start controlling the Pokemon yourself. You have all the commands and actions of a regular Pokemon game, except this time it's real time and you are moving the Pokemon yourself. You're doing the moving around, you're doing the dealing of damage, and you're utilizing the same level up movesets with the added struggle of having to aim yourself. It is such an interesting concept, especially because this is something that people have thought about for ages, and only recently, within the last couple of years, did somebody finally make it a reality. It's a really interesting concept to mess around with, and if I had a controller, I'd probably play it way more, but I don't, so I don't really want to. Not that it's not fun or anything like that, but for me, playing on a keyboard is just so miserable, so 9 times out of 10, I simply don't. But playing the little bit that I did play, I did get a general idea of things that could work in a style like this and things that wouldn't work in a style like this. One of the reasons why I do believe it could work is because it could simply just be this and nothing more. Under normal circumstances, to make the game a little bit more interesting, they would have to introduce something like a gimmick or something like that to really change up the tide of battle. In this very specific case, the major change and quote-unquote gimmick would be that you are actually controlling the Pokemon, changing it from a battle of wits to a battle of skill. Yeah, sure, theoretically, it could still be possible and even possibly fun to have a gimmick like Mega Evolution or Z moves or something like that, but in reality, we don't really need something like that all that bad when you're changing up the core formula this much. The only things that they would need to focus on is making the game feel good and making sure that the animations are on point, and after that, we're good to go. We really don't need that much else. Another reason that I believe it could work is because they wouldn't really need to change too much in the online aspect either. Sure, we'd probably have to do a little bit of reworks on how abilities work and how items work in this case, but I think that could definitely be a fun little challenge for the developers, especially because they don't need to go anywhere. They would just have to have a different use, kind of like how they have different uses in pretty much every single spin-off game we've ever had. Now, I will admit there probably would be a serious divide on competitive battling, specifically because, again, this time it would actually come down to skill more so than strategy. Now this one's a personal one because I personally love fighting games, I love arena fighters and things like that, so I don't think it would be that big of a deal, and honestly, I'd probably be more involved if it were like that. However, a lot of people on the competitive side of Pokemon that are actively participant to this day definitely would probably have a problem with that. Another reason I see this working is because they could definitely utilize this style to change up story scenarios very heavily. Imagine breaking into the enemy team's base and all of a sudden you are surrounded by like 15 Zubats or something like that. Instead of battling them individually or doing whatever the hell Pokemon Scarlet and Violet did, you are actively going toe-to-toe with all of them at the same time with your 1 or 2 Pokemon that you're controlling. Doing some stuff like that would make for some really cool and badass story scenarios. Don't get me wrong, I love when stories hit their highest point in a lot of these games, but let's be a little real, it's a little anticlimactic when it's still a turn-based battle sometimes, you know? The intensity of it is completely taken away when I can literally sit on the screen while the game is still open and animations are still going and go get a snack, you know? It takes out a little bit of the intensity to me. But hey, I don't know, maybe that's just a me thing. Now here's where things get a little unfortunate when the coin flips, because there are some very realistic reasons as to why this concept would not work. To put it bluntly, this would simply turn the game into like an arena fighter RPG. One of the closest examples of this that I can probably see is like the Tales series. In those games, especially in the more recent entries, you are literally in kind of an open world RPG where you run around, run into enemies, but instead of it being a turn-based battle, you are actively putting out combos on these guys. Every individual enemy that you see puts you in like something of a little arena that you have to fight them in. You're moving around and dodging and coming up with different combos on the fly to get rid of these guys. As much as I wouldn't hate this concept for something like Pokemon, that's not something that they're probably willing to do, especially with the amount of time it would take. Coming up with that many animations for all of the Pokemon that would be available in that game would take forever. That's not something Pokemon Company is willing to hold out for. For a spin-off game, debatably, but for a mainline game, something that would change the core of Pokemon in of itself, they would not be willing to take that risk. And technically, yeah, they could take the sprite route, but they're not gonna go back to that. Trust me, I would love an HD 2D Pokemon game that looks anything like Octopath Traveler, or even the new upcoming Dragon Quest III remake, but they're not doing that. They're not moving backwards in any way, shape, or form from 3D. And speaking of time and investment, could you imagine the amount of Pokemon we would lose if they were to try and invest that much time into developing actual animations and stuff like that? We would get almost nothing. Even looking to Pokepark 1 and 2 as examples, even though those games did feature a lot of Pokemon with probably, it's safe to say, plenty of animations, they were very simple and repetitive animations because those were CPUs, Pokemon that we would never be able to play as. Imagine a version of that with hundreds of different Pokemon to be able to choose from. Yeah, fun in theory, but it would probably turn out a lot like the DLC portion of Scarlet and Violet, where we could kind of control the Pokemon, but they didn't really have much to them. It wouldn't be nearly as fun if each individual Pokemon didn't have as much uniqueness and fun about them as Pikachu or the rest of the squad did in Pokepark 2. And don't even get me started on Pokken Tournament. It does have a nice cast of characters, but in reality, that's not even a quarter of the amount of Pokemon that they could have easily added into the game. So overall, as much as it would be cool to see a concept like this fully realized and fleshed out, it's just not a realistic stance to take given what we've seen from Game Freak. Given what happened with Pokemon Sword and Shield's Dex cut, there's no way in hell a 3D fully realized, basically 3D anime fighter Pokemon game would get nearly the same roster as even Pokken Tournament. Because in that game, the only things that they really needed to focus on were the Pokemon fighters themselves, the arenas, the assists, and that's pretty much it. I mean, come on, the artwork was 2D, let's be real here. And this wasn't even Game Freak, mind you. I also just realized in the midst of saying that Game Freak as a development company isn't really used to developing anything other than turn-based combat anyways. So, yeah, nah, it probably wouldn't work. It would never happen, and that's just kind of what it boils down to. While I would love to see something of a 3D arena fighter kind of Pokemon RPG to really change things up a little bit, it would probably turn out less like Pokken Tournament or Pokepark 2, and probably more so along the lines of like a Pokemon Unite RPG, which I personally believe is a little bit more on the boring side. But even then, I don't really know. Maybe I'm just talking out of my ass a little bit. As a spin-off concept with a lot of different mechanics removed, I think it could potentially work. Honestly, I could totally see them pulling Bandai to the side again and being like, hey, you've proven what you know, given, you know, Pokken Tournament exists. Why not do this but turn it into an RPG instead? Who knows? Maybe they'd be able to cook. Or maybe they would rush the hell out of development like they do their own games. Oy vey. Overall, I think that Pokemon Reloaded shows us that it's not impossible, but in a 3D setting or anything past a fan game, it's not really practical. And given that they already have a money-making formula with the core concepts of Pokemon already, I think they would do just fine without changing up the main core games too much in this, direction. However, I personally don't think there's anything wrong with dreaming about it, but hey, Maybe that's just me. So you remember like a minute ago when I said I might be talking out of my ass? I definitely kind of sort of was for this one. This is just a concept of an idea that I had by playing Pokemon Reloaded, and I would just love to see it as a tangible, real thing. But unfortunately, it's just not really in the cards for any reason. And, you know, it sucks a little bit, but hey, you know, I'll love Pokemon for what it is anyway. And there's nothing wrong with turn-based combat. I enjoy turn-based combat for what it is, even if it does get a little stale sometimes, but I'll always be around to enjoy that. So, you know, whatever's clever. But enough yapping out of me. The mic is going over to you because it's your turn. See what I did? Anyway, so you guys go ahead and tell me what you guys are thinking in the comment section below. Was I really just talking out of my ass? This is a stupid idea, something that could never work, or could I have been onto something that could really change the game and people's perspectives on it forever in a good, positive way? Tell me everything that you guys are thinking in the comment section below, because you know for a fact that I am always going to be down there with you guys. But with that, it does appear to be skedaddle o'clock, so I'm going to go ahead and do just so. I would like to thank you guys ever so much for watching. I truly do hope you enjoyed. Do me the greatest favor of dropping a like and a comment, and consider subscribing for more content just like this here. And with that, I'm gone. So thanks again, hope you enjoyed, and I'll be seeing you guys in the next video. Do me the greatest favor of taking good ass care, and I'll see you all next time.